Welcome. This is Samantha Skelly, and you are listening to the Hungry for Happiness podcast, where we dig deep and discover how to reconnect into your body, heal your relationship to food, and finally feel the liberation and freedom you desire. Kleenex is encouraged, and pants are optional. What's up, Phoenixes, and welcome back to the Hungry for Happiness podcast. You are listening to episode 007 with Rachael Maddox. I am so incredibly excited for you guys to dig your teeth into this episode. Every time I speak to this woman, whether it's in person, on the phone, through text, I just cling to her every word. She is so educated in this realm of trauma, and I know this conversation and this topic is very, very common in the Hungry for Happiness community. So I know a lot of people listening are going to love this episode. So not only is she a dear friend of mine, she is a trauma resolution educator, coach, and guide who dedicates her days to helping women who've experienced sexual and complex trauma. She spends her days allowing women to just reclaim their pleasure, their power, and wholeness. In her first book, Secret Bad Girl, Rachael mixes story, science, and poetry to reveal the ins and outs of breaking the trauma spell. Rachael's on a fierce mission to help as many women as possible through one-to-one coaching, groups, and online courses. I know you're going to love this episode. What's up, Phoenixes? Welcome back to the Hungry for Happiness podcast. I am super jazzed. I can feel my cells like vibrating with like just love and excitement and joy and all the things right now from my dear friend, Rachael Maddox. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, love.
Psyched to be here.
Okay. So if you're listening to this, I highly recommend you just stop everything you're doing, sit down and grab a journal and start to take notes. Rachael and I have jammed before in person, and she is full of so much wisdom, so much knowledge. It's so beautiful to be connected to her because there's a lot of women in my world, in my community, who have had a lot of trauma happen to them and a lot of sexual trauma, a lot of various forms of trauma. And Rachael is such a beautiful resource for really understanding trauma. And we're going to get into that a lot today. So before we get started, the question we have all our guests answer is, what is the number one thing about life that makes you feel most alive?
You know, the first thing that came into my mind was mud.
I want to know like the thought process behind that. Like that excites me too, but let's go.
It was just this immediate feeling of some cool earth like on my body. You know, and I think that is what makes me feel most alive, like being totally sensually entrenched in something beautiful and vital and delicious.
I love that. Have you had those like full body mud things?
No, I haven't, but I need to, clearly.
Oh my gosh. I can remember this one time. And I mean, this wasn't at all like sensual or intentional, but I remember this one time I was about 19 and I was in Laos, and there's this place in Laos where you can go tubing, and it's basically just like this, you know, drunken escapade of like just tubing down this river. But at the end of the river, there's this big like mud pool, and it was like the most freeing thing ever. I've never been so jealous of pigs in my life. I was like, they get to do this all the time. This is so amazing.
Oh my God.
I love that answer. You know what? I think that's going to be I don't think anyone will ever answer that on this show. That's good, girl. That's good. Mud. All right. Mm-hmm. I love it. So, before we hopped on here, I was sharing with Rachael how so many of my women struggle with sexual trauma. So many of them are using food to create a physical barrier to intimacy because they feel vulnerable. They don't want to recreate any trauma that has previously happened to them. So I would love to just start with, for those women who are listening who have experienced this visceral, sensation of trauma in their bodies, how can we recognize that, and how can we begin to open ourselves up to healing when something so devastating has happened to us in the past? Let's just start it right with should rip off the Band-Aid right out of the gate here.
Yeah. I think the first piece to acknowledge is that you could be in a number of places with sex after having experienced sexual trauma or sexual violation. And wherever you are, let's destigmatize it, because there's, first of all, no one talks about this, right? People talk about rape and Take Back the Night and yada, 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 and 1 billion rising, but we don't talk about what it's like to live with sexual trauma. So I'd love to first just start there and say,
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So often, you know, what is sexual trauma, or what is rape? Rape is any kind of non-consensual sexual experience. And oftentimes we comply in that. So we can be accidentally compliant in things that end up feeling violating to us. And so there can be shame and humiliation around that as well. And also sort of the sense of self-blame and like, well, I deserve how fucked up I am now because I was in that violating experience. So anyway, but post sexual violation, because violation is essentially a boundary issue, it's more was taken from you than you actually wanted to give consensually, or you gave more than was a wholehearted yes for you. Right? We can violate ourselves totally, and then so much trauma for that. So how does that look? Well, because it's been a boundary violation, people generally cultivate either hyper boundaries or hypo boundaries. Okay. So hyper boundaries can be like, well, damn, last time I let anybody into my pussy, like they didn't treat it so well, so I'm not letting anybody in there for quite some time. Or the last time I let somebody into my heart, they manipulated it and, you know, abused me, so I'm not letting anybody in there. That's a hyper boundary. You kind of form a brick wall barrier around whatever part of you was violated. Or maybe you don't trust your mind because you've been easily manipulated in the past. So you just decide like, I'm going to have to, you know, I need really strict rules so that I know what I'm doing. Right. So those kinds of, that's the hyper. And hyper can have kind of like a fight energy to it. It can be like very defensive. It can feel like anxiety in your body when you think about dating. Or when you think about having sex, it can feel really rigid and tight. Or it can have like a flight energy, like avoidant by at all means. Like I will not go toward that. I will run from it. Right. That, I mean, and not to say that. So I identify as queer, but it could be like, oh, I'm never dating men. I'm only dating women. That kind of thing. So it's hyper boundaries. Then you've got hypo boundaries, which is you're so used to being taken from that it just becomes normal to you. And this is more of a dissociative freeze response. So you've got this open door essentially in your heart or in your mind or in your vagina or even in your root, like your financial system. You've got an open door and you're so used to being taken from or giving more than is a wholehearted yes for you that you find yourself over and over again in those kinds of violating situations. It could also look like you use certain drugs like pot or alcohol or food to stay in a kind of frozen, numb state. And that actually can be a hypo boundary. It can keep you open. So because I'm high, I can have sex with people because I'm not really there.
So how do we begin to like recognize these boundaries? Because I love how you just described this perfectly, but I think for a lot of people, they might be operating like this, but not knowing how they're doing it or what they're doing. Does that, you know, how can we begin to explore if someone is operating from one or the other?
Yeah. And the other thing is you can totally be doing both.
For sure. Got it. Okay.
That's really normal. Well, the antidote to this would be a regulated sense of boundaries. So with regulated boundaries, you have a sense of discernment about, well, first of all, you care about your sense of safety and emotional safety, physical and emotional safety and well-being. And you can discern whether or not something's going to feel safe emotionally and physically or not. And then you can also choose to let things that are safe in and keep things that aren't safe out. So one of the red flags for you might be, can I discern whether or not something's safe? Am I cleaning up messes? Am I dealing with aftermaths of decisions I didn't even realize I was making? Is it 3 days later and I'm thinking, was that super fucked up? What happened? Or am I just being too sensitive?
Right. Right. So the whole trust thing, you know, not trusting our minds, this is a really, really big one. I think a lot of the women that I work with, especially around food, it's like, well, I just can't trust myself because my mind, you know, my mind has done this before. My mind has done that before. How can we begin to explore like the deeper part of us to trust? Because our minds can be, you know, our mind is a beautiful tool. It's an incredible tool, but when it's not anchored in the right belief, you're right. It can sometimes guide you into an area that is not desirable because you've not proactively chosen the correct belief to allow your mind to align with. So how can we begin to trust ourselves after we've had trauma happen to us?
Girl, that's $1 million question. I love that question. How can we begin to trust ourselves? I think actually this is a counterintuitive answer, but the first thing that we can begin to do is see the wisdom in our emergency response.
Beautiful.
So why are we numbing out? We're numbing out because we don't feel safe, or because we think if we're numb, we won't feel pain. It's actually a safety mechanism. It's a ineffective safety mechanism. It's a safety mechanism that might have worked during the initial violations of your life. Yeah. But now it's sort of like a bad habit.
Got it. Yeah.
But I think that that's the first step, is actually to recognize that whatever our body's response has been is wise. It's been a life-saving mechanism. That's a really important thing. And I could probably say it 1,500 times because I'm sure whoever is listening is like, fuck you. What the fuck are you talking about? It's not really safe for me to be bulimic, or it's not actually safe for me to eat this much food, or to smoke pot that often, or whatever it is. But if we can recognize that it's actually an emergency response, that there's some part of you that's trying to protect you, and you can look to that protector and you can say, hey, I get that you think I'm unsafe right now. Let's talk about that.
Yes.
Like, what's really happening? And this is a really simple, stupid seeming practice, but I give it to people a lot, which is like, when you're in a moment of overwhelm or being triggered by something, or you want to go into an emotional, you know, a reactive response, a bad habit or whatever. So just pause and take 3 or 4 deep breaths. And then, this is really silly and stupid, say your name out loud. I am Rachael Maddox. This is the current date, the current time, and I'm in wherever you are. Say your city and state, and then look around 360, like with your head, and assess the level of danger that you're in.
Oh, girl, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. You know, it's like the seemingly insignificant little tools that we hear make actually the most profound difference, because by virtue of someone doing something just as simple as that, they automatically are dropped into the moment.
Right.
And when we're in the moment and we're present, it is so much easier to have a relationship with reality and what is current, rather than our mind going into the future or in the past. That's beautiful. I love that. I love that.
And you know what might come up is like, well, damn, I'm so lonely. I think that loneliness is actually underneath a lot of it. We've got these triggered emotional responses, but in the end, underneath, a lot of time people are isolated and lonely. Yeah. And then we've got that next step, which is like, oh, well, I'm realizing the real thing is that I'm isolated, or that I'm lonely, or that I can use a fucking hug, but I don't know how to get one.
Oh,
so
gosh.
This is really where so one of the things people don't talk about with trauma is isolation. You tend to self-isolate. And the question then becomes, how do I come out of isolation in a safe way and get that need for intimacy met?
Oh my gosh. I can feel this doesn't happen very often when I'm interviewing people, but I feel like this like my whole body, there's so much energy in my body, and it's just like, there's so much truth to what you're saying. And and I know this is going to, I know the feeling that I feel in my body right now, I know a lot of our listeners are feeling it. And I think it's just like my response to like how this is going to land with people. It's so beautiful, so rich. You talked about self-violation. Can you kind of go into self-violation? What does that mean? How does that show up for people? And how do we recognize it?
Yeah. So consent, let's talk about consent, because that's what let's do it. So what makes something consensual, what makes an exchange or an experience consensual is if whoever is receiving the thing, let's say that like, Samantha, I would like, you know, a hug from you, and it's me wanting this hug from you. I could ask, will you hug me? And then what makes it consensual is one, that I've asked, and two, that you say yes or no based on your wholehearted desire. And so if you are kind of like, you smell kind of weird and you have a funny face, I don't actually want to hug you, but you hug me anyway, that's a self-violation. And you've gone outside of the bounds of consent to please somebody else. Now, this can be a safety, a life-saving mechanism that we learned as children or that we've been indoctrinated with. So no one, we do not live in a culture of consent. We, especially for women, we live in a patriarchal structure that tells us that we need to long for approval from, the patriarch. So that's how we maintain safety and power. Yeah. So we're indoctrinated to violate ourselves, first of all. Yeah. But second of all, anytime you say yes to something that's not a wholehearted desire, it's a self-violation.
This is really beautiful. And I think for a lot of people listening, there's a scale to this. There's a severity scale to this. So, I mean, we can go as severe as sexual trauma or what have you, and even something as little as people pleasing. People pleasing can be like the gateway drug into self-violation that can be fairly severe down the line if we allow ourselves to do it. And I think for that just kind of like clicked for me is like, oh, hang on a second. When I'm not honoring myself by saying no to people, that is actually an act of self-violence. Whoa. That's an amazing realization for so many women who are listening, even maybe for those who have not experienced sexual trauma. I'm sure everyone listening has experienced a time where you said yes when you meant no. And that could be simple acts, simple acts of service that you really did not want to do or felt stretched to do that. And you said yes because you in that moment decided that your needs were not as important as someone else's needs. And I'm not saying that this is like a slippery slope and it's going to end in sexual trauma. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm alluding to here is there is a severity scale to this, and self-violation can be something as simple as that.
Yeah, totally. And I want to just bring in this concept because I know the women who are listening are probably very much into self-responsibility and changing their lives and self-improvement and personal growth. And I am too, that's my industry. I'm in it. All in it. But
in it to win it.
One of the things I want to talk about that doesn't get talked about as much in this industry is the structure that actually upholds this reality. Yeah. So we're, like I mentioned it, but we're actually in a patriarchal structure where from the time we're born, because we're girls, we are conditioned into thought patterns and realities. Like women get paid, 83 cents to the dollar for men. So we are actually sisters in a struggle. And I think this is super important because we can turn against each other. We can become competitive with one another. Like, why is that person so able to get her shit together? Or I'm really jealous that this person's like skinny and pretty or blah, 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 or whatever, has all this money. Okay. But in the end, we're all actually chasing after the same thing under the same conditions, which is that as women, we're conditioned to long for and strive for approval from the patriarchy in order to be safe. And I think that's just an important thing to say, to kind of create an umbrella that we're actually under this system together. And if we internalize all of the change that has to happen, when we say, well, God, I'm so fucked up, what's wrong with me? You're actually missing the point. And nothing, like, you can't be a woman in society today and not think something's wrong with you, because you've been conditioned to think something's wrong with you. So I like to depersonalize it as well as destigmatize it, because this is a collective issue.
Whoa, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. The concept of feeling safe in today's society as a woman. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about what that means? How we can feel a deeper felt sense of safety in our bodies. This is something there's confusion with this when I talk about it in my community, and I would love for you to touch on it if it's like that. Yeah, that felt sense of like really feeling safe. That can be confusing for people.
Yeah, totally. I get that. A lot of my clients, if I speak into the concept of safety, are like, I don't know if I've ever felt safe in my entire life.
There we go. Thank you.
And I'm like, totally, makes sense. So there are two things. One is, if you're seeking to understand or to feel what it means to be safe in your body, it might be helpful to start with looking for neutrality, or looking for anything that feels possibly okay, or looking for any parts of you that feel a little bit slower and wider and more still, or more grounded, as opposed to this concept of safe. Because we can have hypervigilance, we can have histories where hypervigilance was needed in order to be safe. So we can have kind of that buzzing feeling around us at all times, because that is actually how we, quote unquote, feel safe or are safe.
Yeah.
So, and if you can't access something that feels kind of neutral, and when I say neutral, I mean like maybe slow, or just like nothing's happening in that part of you. So even right now, we could all just check in with our bodies, anyone who's listening, and just take a moment and just notice, like, where are things fast inside of me? If I notice like the energy in my chest is a little bit faster, maybe even like the airflow coming from my lungs out of my mouth because I'm speaking a lot feels a little faster. And you could also look for like heat or constriction or tension. And then check out, without having to erase anything that's fast or hot or constricted, check out where things might feel kind of slower or cooler or more still. I actually notice, like, for some reason, my elbows, my bones feel really still. My sit bones are really still on the ground. My mind feels very still. And so you can kind of go back and forth between speed and stillness, hot and cold, constriction and expansion, and just notice what you're noticing. You know, we can become so goal-oriented. I have to feel safe. Well, actually, that have to can create, it can feel like force. So to answer your original question, the antidote to danger is empowered choice. So safety is empowered choice.
Yeah. I love this. You know, it's so interesting for me. I recognized, I guess it was about last year, that like my core need for security wasn't met in my body. And it's something that I'm still working on today, like still consciously realizing that like there's this part of me that like doesn't feel safe and secure. And so I was relying on external things to feel safe and secure. May that be like parents, money, housing, whatever it was. And it was still like, logically I'm so safe and secure, but like there's something that's like, there's something deep within me that didn't feel that. And it's been so interesting for me to consciously be aware of that and just love it and love it and love it and love it and love it. And know that it's like, it was like my little child who didn't feel safe when my parents got a divorce when I was 3 years old. I didn't know that until fairly recently. And so I'm really loving like this concept of safety. I feel so much safer than I did a year ago, and nothing changed externally. It was just all about loving this inner need and this it's not even a wound. It's just like this inner child who's just like scared, scared and does not feel secure and safe. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think like a lot of people can are going to resonate with that. I want to talk about this feeling of desire. So a lot of times, we have this like inner like bad girl. You know about that, right?
Just a little bit.
This desire, right? And then I feel like there's this like place where desire is also scary. So we want it, but we're also terrified of it. Like I want to be sexually expressed and I want to, just be that like wild bad girl, and it fucking terrifies me. Can we speak to that and anything that you have to say around like embracing that desire with love while being safe and not being like confronted by or like thinking that it's a bad thing to feel that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, well, first of all, yeah, your desires are fucking great. And they can be really scary because if we've had experiences of sexual violence, we can have danger and sexuality coupled together.
Right.
And so to uncouple danger and sexuality and to say, then recouple safety and sexuality or safety and wildness is a process. So if, like for me, for example, I lost my virginity, statutory anal rape. I was 13 years old. I was reckless, I was bold, I was intrepid, I was diving into this territory, and I dove too far, too fast. Fucked. So what do you think has happened to my bold, desirous, horny, inner 13-year-old? Fucking scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
With good reason.
Yeah.
And, people talk a lot about safe sex, right? Like condoms, STDs, blah, blah, blah. But we don't really talk so much about emotionally safe sex.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah. Being in relationship with people, whether they're a partner or just somebody that you're having sex with or whatever, where you feel emotionally safe, where whatever that age in you who's afraid to be herself can like talk about her needs, can talk about her fears, can talk about her desires. And of course, that person, that age in you, won't be able to talk about her needs, fears, or desires if you haven't done that internal work with yourself. So one exercise that you can do, this is like really fun and simple. I do this with a lot of my clients. It's not fun or simple, actually. I mean, it's simple, and I thought it was kind of fun when I first did it. So what I recommend you do is you write like, you kind of like mind map for whatever age in you feels most afraid with sex. Cool. So for me, it's like my 13-year-old girl. Maybe you're like 17, maybe you're 6, I don't know. And you first start by writing in the center of a piece of paper, like, my 13-year-old girl needs. And then you make one of those cloud bubbles and you like mind map like you're in elementary school.
Right.
And you write all the needs that your 13-year-old girl has about sex, but just about life. And then like another one, like my 13-year-old girl is afraid of, my 13-year-old girl desires, the kind of boyfriend my 13-year-old girl needs is, and you just keep riffing off of it based on that first one of what she needs. Take the things that you found and riff more off of those. So like she needs friends. Okay, what kind of friends does she need? Or she needs like an empowered mom who's comfortable in her sexuality. Cool, what kind of mom does my 13-year-old girl need me to be for her? And then you just keep making more and more mind maps. And all of a sudden, you really understand that part of yourself and what she needs. So when you come into a relationship with somebody, it's not necessarily going to be easy to tell them, but you're going to know what's real for you.
So interesting. I think when we don't do the work like you just described and actually realize where our needs are coming from, we just think it's all of our woman. Like, it's just me. It's just, I'm crazy. I don't know why I'm like this.
Right.
But when we actually break it down in a framework like that, it makes it so simple. So then what we can do is like, we look at our behaviors and we're like, okay, why did I do that certain behavior? Why did I get into a relationship with this man? Why did I say this? And it's like, oh, got it. It's because that was the need of my 11-year-old child, not my woman.
Right.
And it's like, this is the pinnacle of self-mastery, when we can understand and have like a very clear idea of where these different behaviors are coming from, why we're getting triggered. It's not our woman that's getting triggered. It's this little one inside of us that's getting triggered. It gives us this, this sense of like self-observation. Like I can look at this and be the observer of all of these tendencies and all of these triggers and behaviors. And when we have that separation and we're not so identified with it, we can integrate more compassion, curiosity. We can like look at this objectively and go, oh, okay, got it. This is the part of me that needs healing. I love that. I love that.
When I first did this exercise with myself, I decided I was going to do a month with my 13-year-old girl. And I thought that what it was going to mean is that I was going to have like a really strict bedtime, and I was going to like be super prude and all this stuff. But actually what it did was, because my 13-year-old girl felt safe that like I was taking care of her, my adult got to play with a lot more freedom, a lot less fear. Cool. So I actually ended up feeling way more empowered sexually by taking care of the kid inside of me.
So during that month, you kind of just like took her along, you went like grocery shopping with her, you like talked to her, like how did that work?
I just would write a little letter to my 13-year-old girl every day. Like, so, hey girl, what's happening? What do you need today? And then she would write back, and then I would write back. Just real simple.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. It's so interesting. I don't know if you experience this, but whenever I introduce the concept of inner child to my clients, they're just like, what? I can do this. I can think about this. And it's really beautiful, because sometimes when I first say this, they go, Sam, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even remember myself as a 10-year-old or whatever. And then as we start to do the work, like memory starts to come back and become clear, and they start to make associations and feel things that they used to feel. And when we get to heal that part of us, we also have so much more access to our joy, that like playful, light, beautiful essence that we all crave. We're all starving to feel that level of self-expression and feel childlike and feel light. And, you know, as adults, we just suppress that, and we suppress the needs of it. And when we can like pay attention and heal it, that part of us comes to life, which is such a beautiful thing. Yes. I want to talk about feeling, after someone experiences sexual trauma and they are in a partnership, or they want to be in a partnership, but all they're thinking about is how scared that used to be, and they're feeling extremely vulnerable. How can they reintegrate into feeling safe, into, I love what you said about desire and wildness, like rather than like desire and danger or something like that. How does one reintegrate and develop a healthy relationship to sex in their body after they've been violated?
Yeah. Well, I think it really does come down to empowered choice. So if you start practicing on a daily level, being in consensual choice with yourself, not overriding your no, being really honest about what you don't want and what you do want, and making that your religion. You know, once you make consent your religion, you know that you've got it in you to you start to trust yourself. You start to trust yourself and the relationships that you're choosing. And so then when it comes time to maybe be more vulnerably committed to somebody, or be more vulnerably sexually intimate with somebody, you still have that foundational framework of like, I'm not going to override myself at any point here. And you'll surprise yourself around what you really want, you know? I know for me, like, I'm kind of in a little bit of a new relationship with somebody, and it's vulnerable for me because it's interesting because I'm not the way that you think. Basically, at a more mature stage, and as a more mature person, someone who's been practicing consent, who's really clear what turns me on and what my values are and stuff, now that I'm more aligned personally, all my relationships look really different. Beautiful. And how I relate sexually also is very different. If before I used to be super like rah, 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 like right off the bat, because some part of me could kind of like not even be there so I could be performing, I can't perform anymore. So I'm so much more real and I'm so much more vulnerable, and it's a much slower burn in the beginning for me. Like I have to tell people, listen, it's going to take a little longer, and but the safer I feel, the more parts of me will come out, and I'm not going to push any part of me to come out before I feel safe. So if you want all of me, let's keep this conversation around emotional safety going.
Oh God, that's so important. Why do we not talk about emotional safety as much as we talk about physical safety? This is a huge piece. I know for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And this is not a conversation that I've had A, on this podcast, or B, I don't think in very many other conversations in my entire life, to be honest. This is so important.
And the thing is, most women who have histories of violation, right, the violation is emotional. So we don't think that we're worth emotional safety. We don't think that we deserve it. We don't think we can ask for it. And not that many men or women, whether you date men or women, not many people are practiced in really respecting emotional safety. Or meeting and matching that need, because people are impatient, people are insecure, people are making things mean shit. So the more you start to cultivate, though, your sense of self, your sense of sovereignty, like I honor my yeses and my nos, like that is my religion, the more people you'll attract who are on that program, and the more you'll spot the people who don't really quickly, and you'll be like, hey, because you're in this relationship with yourself that's kind of unbreakable. But until you have that self relationship of my emotional safety comes first for me, you're going to probably continuously be in relationships that aren't that emotionally safe. Or somebody will be super good at emotional safety and you'll put them on a pedestal like your savior, which also happens.
Okay. So I want to pull on a thread here, which I think is so, so important. So we're talking about emotional safety in regards to sex and being in integrity with your word, and what is a visceral yes, what is a visceral no. And something that I want those of you listening to really understand is how you are in one area of your life translates into every area. So if you are breaking your word with yourself in relation to food or your body or money or whatever, and you're having a very toxic emotional relationship with yourself in one area, it is going to translate into other areas. So what we're talking about here is, how can I show up in integrity and have a strong emotional connection with myself in all areas of my life? Because when we are stronger with relationships, money, food, whatever it is, then sexually we will have that as well. Is this kind of the thread that we're going on, right? Wherever you are, there you go, whatever that saying is.
Right. Wherever I go, there I am.
Yeah, there it is.
And if you struggle with this practice, because people with a history of trauma can often be like very all or nothing. So like, I'm going to go all the way into this relationship with this person, or like, I'm not letting anyone in, I'm totally celibate, or I'm going to binge, or I'm going to starve myself,
Yeah, that's huge.
So, and the antidote to that is actually small doable steps. So even though, yes, everywhere you go, there you are, or what you do in one area of your life, you do every area, choose the easiest place to practice.
Right.
And
Yes.
You don't have to get it right in all the places. Like, maybe it's easy for you to practice what's a hell yes in terms of just how you get dressed in the morning.
Oh, that's so good.
There. Just start where it's small and easy, because if you try to do all of the pieces, you'll get overwhelmed and you'll fail. And it could also create a sense of emergency for you to change that quickly. I like to talk about change as momentum, and this metaphor of like a cruise ship chugging at like 250 miles per hour in an ocean in a certain direction. And if you're going in a certain direction in that ocean, but you want to change your momentum and go the exact opposite direction, you can't just like turn the cruise ship around real fast. That would be dangerous. If you were like the one with the wheel, you would probably burn out or injure yourself. Like, that wouldn't go so well. You gotta do one tiny notch at a time. You probably need to take breaks. You might even need to like get some help. You gotta definitely know where you're going and where you want to go. So shifting momentum is most sustainable in small, doable steps.
Ooh, I love that. Can you say that one more time, just so people can really let it land?
Shifting momentum is most doable in small, or is most effective in small, doable steps.
I love that. It's this whole concept of, have you heard of the word Kaizen? It's like a Japanese term, which basically means continual improvement. And, we live in this world where we just want everything yesterday. We just want, like, give me the quick fix, the thing that I just, like, make it happen, make it happen, make it happen. And it's just, like, not how sustainable transformation works in any arena of our lives at all. And I think the quicker we understand this, the shorter we are going to, shorten our suffering time, because we stay in a state of suffering when we think that we can have these, like, quick fix, banding on a bullet wound type of approaches, when true, sustainable, loving, healing, wonderful, juicy transformation starts with, like, those tiny little things. It's like the low hanging fruit. Like Rachel said, what is that easy thing that you can do in the morning, or, getting dressed, as you mentioned, what arena can I play in that I already feel safe and I already have a felt sense of confidence in, that I can start to rebuild my trust in that area, because it will then percolate into the other areas of our lives. And I really, really, really love that. It's interesting. A lot of the women that I work with, they have issues with money and issues with food. Why? Because the root of all of that is scarcity. And so when they heal the relationship they have to food, and they are thinking and operating and feeling more abundantly, that also translates into money. And it's so beautiful. And I just love how, you reiterated that fact of just, like, don't tackle it all at once in every arena. Start with what feels safe for you.
Totally. Yes.
Oh, that is so good. You were just, like, bombing some serious nuggets, like, all day long. So you spoke about something earlier in the call that I just want to loop back to, because I know it's a very important piece, is this emergency response. Can you kind of go into what that is, why that happens, and where it shows up?
Yeah, so your bodies have this thing called a neuroception. It's your embodied perception of threat. Every human has it, animals have it. It's automatic, it's subconscious, it's run through the reptilian brain. And your neuroception has response levels based in, how dangerous the thing around you seems. So the first response would be hypersocialization, where you try to control everything around you so that those things around you feel more safe, therefore keeping you safe. So over-pleasing could be a hypersocialization response. And that sort of feels like anxiety. It feels like a little bit of hypervigilance, maybe even, and, like, quick, but not super fast, not out of control. You still have cognition with hypersocialization. And then if your body perceives that won't work, that won't be good enough, it'll go up into the next level, possibly, which would be either fight or flight. And this is when, you've got essentially a feeling of rage in your body, or a feeling of terror. So it's, your cognition is kind of like shut off. You're sort of out of your mind, and you're like, I've got to kill this snake or it's going to kill me, or I've got to run as fast as I can or this bear's going to eat me. So your emergency response is, like, full on. Whoosh.
Yeah.
Now, as women, often, especially because a lot of us experience violation as girls, where we're not super strong, or, like, the boys are definitely faster, stronger, blah, 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 we learn that our fight or flight response probably won't work.
Got it.
But if hypersocialization is not working, excuse me, that was like a hypersocialization isn't working, we will skip over fight or flight and go right up into freeze. Freeze is a dissociative state. And there are different levels of freeze. There's, like, that deer in the headlights, like, I'm actually frozen, which is more usually like a physical danger response, might be like a startle response. There's a camouflage, like a owl, like you're, like, kind of hiding, like they can't see me, I'm here, but no one can see me. Yeah. Or there's a possum, which is a deep freeze, which is like dead, where you're there, but you're really not there at all. And women often have a loop between hypersocialization and freeze.
Got it.
Go straight up into one or back and down into the other. And a big part of trauma resolution with women is actually helping them feel and have access to their fight or flight response. So things like that's why self-defense classes are so great, because you're actually activating your capacity to punch somebody,
right? Yeah.
which usually was not successful as a girl.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. If the women want more resource on that, where can they find that? Do you have something for that? Like understanding this, like understanding those stages.
Yeah, well, I have an academy called the Grown Goddess Academy, where I go in depth into trauma.
Cool. Okay.
I mean, I have a podcast coming out.
Yeah, we will put all of those links below, because I love what you just touched on. And I think for a lot of people, they're going to be like, I want to learn more about that. So in the show notes, we will put all of those links for sure.
Probably have some videos I can
okay, cool. Yeah, girl, just shoot us what you got. So do you find like the most common area of trauma that you work with is sexual trauma?
You know, it's funny, because I would say about maybe like 50 to 70% of my clients, but maybe less actually. It might be like half.
Okay.
Have like explicit sexual trauma. A lot of people I work with have developmental trauma. Or what's called complex trauma, which is actually like, it's so funny that this is like a new field, and you can't even really get a PhD in trauma. It's like, doesn't exist. It's just so ridiculous, because everyone has trauma.
Crazy. Yeah.
It's like cutting edge, which to me is hilarious. Like, how is this cutting edge? This is so obvious. But it's not a conversation we're having very much. So anyway, complex trauma is basically interpersonal trauma. So anywhere from emotional abuse to interpersonal violations, whether they're physical, sexual, or not, but any sense of like your safety was put in danger because of an ongoing relational dynamic. So I with a lot of people who have those kinds of scenarios.
Beautiful. If someone has no idea if they have trauma in their body, where is a place that they could start, or how can they explore this? How can they explore, because I think for a lot of people listening, they're like, oh, cool. I wonder if I have that. Or not cool, but oh, interesting. I wonder if I have that.
I did make a quiz once, which was like
a
do you have trauma quiz.
Yeah, cool.
And then also I wrote a book called Secret Bad Girl. And the big reason why I wrote it was for that exact thing. Like, do I have trauma? Could I have trauma? Because I didn't know I had trauma, even though I had, lost my virginity to statutory rape, and can't tell you how many times I've been raped. So I didn't think, though, that I had this thing called trauma that could be affecting me in a certain way. I had no idea. So that's when I wrote Secret Bad Girl, because I actually wanted people to be able to find themselves inside of stories and then have the science explained.
Got it. Can trauma be even if say our mother had trauma and she gave birth to us, do we inherently have that? Do we have to go through an experience in this human life to have that, or is it something that can be inherited?
Totally. So there have been studies that have shown, both with like rats and animals and humans, about inherited ancestral trauma.
Okay.
So so there's lots of kinds. So you can get inherited trauma like through DNA. Where somebody had a really strong fight response and you have like anger issues or whatever.
Yeah.
Or they did studies with like Holocaust victims and, the inherited DNA trauma. But then there can also be like the trauma, like systemic trauma. Yeah. So if you have a lineage of, you come from a family that was slaves, and all of the different, both psychological and physiological responses to having grown up as a slave, you are likely going to be carrying some of those things in your body. There's actually a really cool book, interesting book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome that talks about both the physiology and the psychology and the sociology of trauma inherited, from slavery. And it's
that is so fascinating. That is so fascinating. I want to read that. I find that extremely fascinating.
Yeah.
So you have that quiz. So if we could pop that link and people can go check that out. Okay. Yes. Beautiful. Gosh, I just looked at the time. I'm like, how does time speed up when we're together? Literally every time I see you, I'm like, where did it go? You are just incredible. I'm so honored to know you. I'm so honored that you're doing this work in the world and serving women the way that you are. I feel so confident knowing that any of my community who gets in touch with you is going to be in such good hands. So for those of you listening and you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, I've had an issue with trauma or whatever it is, please reach out to Rachael. Not only is she a dear friend, she's just a wealth of knowledge and just really, really committed to her mission in a way that is extremely inspiring. And I don't say that lightly at all. And there's very few people who I would highly recommend get in touch with, and you are for sure one of them. So if this message is resonating, where can people find you and get amongst your goodness?
RachelMaddox.com.
There we go, RachelMaddox.com. So that will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for hanging out, girlfriend. I'm excited to see you. We're going to have a little date soon.
Thank you so much. This was just a delight to be with you.
Always is. Always is. All right, sweetheart, have a beautiful day and we'll catch you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode on the Hungry for Happiness podcast. You can join the conversation with women just like yourself at hungryonfacebook.com. Until next week, ladies, stay classy and badassy.